Hello and welcome. This is your first video that you're watching on my channel. Hello, my name is James. I use he, they pronouns. And if you're coming back, I appreciate you. Thank you. Welcome back. It's been a while since I've uploaded here. In the meantime, I have started a second channel where I'm uploading my gaming content and stuff from my Twitch channel. But yeah, turns out that writing scripted videos and editing them is really hard, and I'm a perfectionist, so yeah, I'm working on it. But today we are gathered here today to talk about copaganda in the 2019 Netflix cartoon Carmen Sandiego. I actually filmed an entire series review with my friend Theo over at Dimension Bros. So if you want my thoughts on the entire show, you should go check that out. But today, I specifically want to talk about the way that the police are represented in the TV show and kind of the messages that are being sent to the audience of kids watching it. I started watching this show a couple of months ago. God, and it's amazing. There are lots of like really good things about it. The art, the music, the settings, the characters, they're all super interesting. And it kind of just like sucks you in. So I watched the entire 4 seasons in a matter of a couple of months with my boyfriend. But all of those things that I love, I also noticed there's some really weird things. Copaganda is a term that was created by prison abolitionists on Twitter. It describes the phenomenon of how cops are present in TV shows, movies, video games, and turned into these sort of superheroes. No matter how unethical or illegal the actions the police are taking in these media, it doesn't matter. We're taught to empathize and sympathize with them. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. But the fact is, the impact of seeing all of these cops and always empathizing with them means that it becomes more difficult in real life to hold police powers accountable. When you're surrounded by positive imagery of police, you're more likely to believe it. But police are not the heroes and the perfect figures that these pieces of media make them out to be. Police in real life harm and kill people. They destroy families, and they participate in a violent carceral structure that doesn't serve survivors or victims of crimes. Police today have too much power, and I'm a firm believer that both the police and the prison industrial complex needs to be abolished. In the last couple of years, there have been some great analyses of popular cop TV shows. One of my particular passions, though, is educational children's content. So I'm talking about the stuff that we watched when we were younger, or the things that teachers use in the classroom. Educational kids content is especially important because it reveals what people find the most important to learn about a society, or in other words, what children should or should not be taught. But unfortunately, just like textbooks or any other educational content, these TV shows and cartoons are oftentimes flawed, and they reveal the politics and social issues of the time period they've been created in. I think it's really necessary that we analyze educational kids content, not just for like how educational it is, but what kind of plot and messages that it's giving to kids, because it's so common. These are the things that have informed the way we see the world, both kids and adults today. So today, we're investigating the role police have in the Carmen Sandiego franchise, especially the Netflix cartoon. But before we get into that, I want to briefly cover the history of copaganda in children's media. The reason I want to talk about the history of child-specific copaganda is because it reveals a lot of the intention and motivation behind copaganda. These TV shows and games and movies don't exist in a vacuum. They're oftentimes directly related to what's happening in the political world. So as I go through all of these examples, you'll see the reason why police found it necessary to create these resources and communicate directly with children. Children's copaganda is specific. It sanitizes police and their work into something very digestible and almost completely unrecognizable. It turns police figures into friends or even superheroes so that kids can look up to them and maybe even dream of becoming them themselves. Even though in real life, cops commit violence against kids every single day. Knowing what we know, that police brutalize and attack people of color, specifically Black people and immigrants, then how in good conscience can we have all of this children's media where we're forcing kids to interact with police officers? How many kids in these classrooms or watching these TV shows or playing these games have been on the receiving end of violence from police officers? Or even worse, watched their parents be brutalized or killed by police officers? I think we need to move towards a future where police officers, one, don't exist, but two, don't exist in children's media. We're forcing kids to potentially relive traumatic experiences by including cops in almost every single genre. We're going to start off in the 1930s with an educational amusement park that was developed by a retired police officer. It was called Safety Town, and the idea behind it was that kids would visit it and learn how to be safe while crossing the street or how to notice if a fire was happening. It was introduced during the times where streets were getting busier and busier and more accidents were happening. It was clear that kids needed a better idea of traffic safety and how to understand when cars were going to cross and how to use crosswalks, etc. It still exists today across the country. There are like hundreds of locations. It's not a chain, but they're all called the same thing. They're usually nonprofit and they have a really close relationship with the local police department. So I found a lot of like news clips of police officers holding sessions or workshops at these Safety Town locations and using it as a way to talk to kids and get a line with them directly.
To teach safety and teach children that the police were their friends.
Hi, editing James here to pop in and say, look at this dude that created Safety Town. Look at his top hat. Holy shit. Anyways, hey cab. Let's go to the 1960s, a time, of course, where there was intense police brutality going on during the civil rights movement. In the early 60s, there was a picture book released called Policeman Small. It was part of like a larger series of picture books that taught kids about different jobs they could have. In the book, it basically tells a story about how difficult it is to be a traffic officer and how many moving parts there are. While the book in general kind of just exists to demystify the way that traffic works, similar to the 1930s Safety Town, I think it sets an important precedent of media trying to like paint this picture that being a cop is a really hard job. So if you're a kid reading this book, you're going to finish reading the book and think, wow, that's a really hard job, and therefore be more lenient and more forgiving when police officers do things that are wrong. Arguably more popular in the 1960s was the police character Officer Friendly. Officer Friendly was part of a program that was developed by the Chicago Police Department and, weirdly enough, the Sears Company. No idea why they were involved in that. Just screams unnecessary corporate control there. But the Officer Friendly program was basically about getting children to meet cops and to see them as more human. Because when children were watching TV or while they were in the streets, they would see, cops harassing and brutalizing people. So the idea of the Officer Friendly program was that, well, if kids will meet the police officers, then they'll look upon them more favorably and be more likely to trust them. The Officer Friendly program ran through the 60s to the 90s, and it was extremely popular. Like millions of dollars were put into this program. They released coloring books, they had meet and greets, and represents a time where cops were first being introduced to kids as these almost like parental figures. We're going to fast forward to the 1980s, which of course was during the time where the war on drugs was happening. If you don't know, the war on drugs was a time where the Reagan administration and subsequent presidents would overcriminalize Black and brown communities for using drugs. The war on drugs incarcerated hundreds of thousands of people on very small drug charges, oftentimes nonviolent. It's considered by a lot of prison abolitionists the beginning of modern mass incarceration. With this horrible backdrop, the wholesome and lovable character McGruff the Crime Dog appeared. He was a cartoon dog who taught kids not to use drugs and to call the cops when something suspicious was happening in their neighborhood. He was the star of a lot of PSAs, and as such, he became really popular, and he's still used by police departments today. So, what is copaganda in the modern era? Especially since COVID and with the delay of TV shows being filmed and such, a lot of copaganda is actually happening on social media. The types of videos that police officers make, these like dance challenges, lip syncs, they all are aimed towards kids. You know, these are the sort of things that kids are watching on TikTok or YouTube. And so they watch police officers do it, and then, oh my gosh, police officers are actually kind of cool. Maybe I want to trust them more now. Some of these like police social media stars actually include kids in their videos, which I think is particularly concerning because these kids are like 4 or 5. They have no idea what they're participating in. And most notably, they're usually black kids. All right, with that intro to copaganda and children's copaganda out of the way, I want to talk about Carmen Sandiego, the whole reason that we're here today for this video. So let's go over some like basic facts about the Carmen Sandiego franchise. Started in the 1980s during the video game boom with MS-DOS games. They were really simple. You just basically had to answer some trivia about geography and history. But that one video game in 1985 exploded into dozens of more video games, board games, TV shows, game shows, and of course the cartoon that we're talking about here today. The basic plot across the multi-million franchise is about Carmen Sandiego, a very smart thief and mysterious woman who steals art and artifacts, and then you have to track her across the globe. The player or the main character is a police officer, Interpol or Acme, and they're tasked with finding Carmen Sandiego and returning the art to its rightful owners. It's like a more complicated, more educational version of the game Cops and Robbers. So in the franchise, there is Interpol, you know, the Interpol that exists in real life, the international police whose jurisdiction is the entire globe, who's trying to catch Carmen Sandiego. As the games went on, though, there was another institution introduced called Acme, which is like the super cops. They're the best cops of the best, and they basically, their jurisdiction is everywhere. They don't seem to have any higher ups or any, you know, accountability. They can do whatever they want. I found 2 toys that really stood out to me as examples of the way that the franchise makes these police into superheroes. One is an Acme mug. So I guess the idea here is that kids can have an Acme mug and feel like they're in the Acme office. But it just reminds me of like what a real police mug would be. I feel like, why do we have to put kids into the position of police officers? It just seems really unnecessary to me. And the second toy I found, which I think is arguably worse, is a talking computer, and it's called CrimeNet. And so the idea is that you can use this toy to track criminals and to solve mysteries. And you may think to yourself, like, James, you're overanalyzing these toys, but the toys that kids have are really important, and oftentimes they influence the way that they think about like real objects in the world. What's the impact of giving kids like the same exact tools that police have, you know? I feel like we shouldn't be doing that. But the idea that like a kid could have this computer and then track criminals, when the reality of it is that like police databases are extremely biased and racist systems. A lot of police departments will use algorithms to try and figure out who's more likely to commit crimes. And yeah, it's as bad as that sounds. It always targets black and brown people. And so putting that tool in the hands of kids just makes me really uncomfortable. You know, a lot of civil rights leaders were being tracked through databases and being stalked by FBI. I think by having a toy that mimics a real life weapon that's used by police, it teaches kids that it's not that serious. And, you know, it's something that maybe they would want to be able to control. Fun if you just have like, oh, I just have a little police mug and like a police computer. Like, I'm a little police officer. But like, there are real police officers who drink coffee and go on databases and then ruin people's lives. Like, that's not cute. That's not a cute toy. The police and these like one-dimensional villains are always there. And that like really frustrates me because I I find Carmen Sandiego as a character really interesting. And I think the idea of art theft is a really interesting concept that kids do need to learn about. But the way that this franchise goes about it, it turns these cops into superheroes, and it's so unnecessary. Why can't we have an educational entertainment franchise that doesn't rely on cops solving all of the issues? By including all of these police characters, the Carmen Sandiego franchise is not only adding to the existing propaganda that's in society, it also takes away from the educational benefit. Alrighty, we got all of the introduction out of the way, baby. You made it. Now, to talk about the next Netflix cartoon, I'm actually going to be handing it over to an interview that I did with my friend Theo a couple of weeks ago now. 2 weeks ago? This video is late, okay? We had a conversation about all of our feelings about the show, and we got into some specific plot points. It's my hope that I gave you some history that you can use to better understand the conversation that we were having. So for the second part of this video, I wanted to talk to somebody else because I'm not the only one who likes Carmen Sandiego, surprisingly enough. And I just finished making a video with Theo here about the cartoon. So I would like to talk to him, get some of their thoughts about the cop representation in Carmen Sandiego. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Theo. I am one half of the YouTube channel Dementia Bros, where me and my friend Isaac make videos about cartoons and video games, mostly Pop Tropica and stuff, so if you're into that, you should come subscribe. And then I also do my own stuff on my own YouTube channel and my own Twitch channel. But yeah, I would say I'm mostly Dementia Bros, and I love Carmen Sandiego in more ways than one. The character and the show, but I also have some a lot of feelings about it. So
the reason that Acme and Carmen exist, I would argue, is because the regular police force of the world cannot answer Vile's issues. The police are maybe incompetent or cannot figure out the level of evil that Vile has. So why do the police exist at all in this world? That's my question.
This is really common among children's media, is that like you have to have incompetent police in order for your characters to be able to like be the heroes. It just happens in everything. Like in Scooby-Doo, it's not the police solving mysteries, it's the Scooby Gang. So I feel like in shows in which your main character, who is not a police officer but is supposed to be like fighting crime, you have to have incompetent police. Any media that involves a character trying to stop someone who otherwise the police should stop, they're just like, well, the police won't do anything.
It is painfully accurate, and I feel like it just misses the mark of a really necessary point about how police are actually incompetent in real life, because instead of just hopping in and solving the issues for police and then handing them over back to the police, why not start the conversation of, if the police can't solve this issue, shouldn't we restructure the way that we deal with justice in our society?
Because the characters are essentially fulfilling the role of the police, not like doing exactly what they would do, but in the sense that they're like a band-aid solution. If Carmen Sandiego were to point out that like, hey, why aren't there police stopping Vile? Well, you're not stopping Vile. You're stopping an individual Vile scheme, but you're doing nothing to take down Vile. You're just like giving them little roadblocks. No one in these shows are ever trying to like get to the root source. They're just, because it's an episodic structure. So Carmen obviously in episode 1 can't go and take down all of Vile. If you were to address the problems with the police, the shows won't do that because they'd also be addressing the problems with their characters.
I think that it's a great point that even though superheroes and main hero characters in kids shows aren't technically police, they do a lot of the same functions of the police, and it's easy for police in real life to use those narratives for their benefit. For example, at the Capitol riots that happened in the US on January 6th, a lot of people were wearing Captain America symbols because they find some kind of familiarity in the way that Captain America as a superhero acts and the way that they, as alt-right militia or as off-duty policemen, act. I want to talk about one really big plot point of the cartoon, which is that Acme actually kills Carmen's dad. And the reason that that happens is that the Acme chief misfires. And that scene in general, because it's a flashback, is very powerful because we're learning about Carmen's backstory for the first time. But it's also very difficult to watch because it mirrors things that have happened in real life. Police misfiring or killing innocent civilians. Though police killing anybody, I believe, is wrong. But I just think that's really interesting, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh my god, because I'm pretty sure at the time she's not even with Acme. She's a normal police officer when she does that.
Oh my gosh, she is.
Not the chief of Acme. She hasn't started Acme yet. She is a normal police officer when she does that, or at least a detective. She's like maybe higher up in the ranks, but like she is a normal police officer. And like I think you're misremembering the scene because I remember that she does it intentionally. She sees him go to reach for something in his pocket, and she does it intentionally. And it is like a perfect parallel of what happens in real life all the time. And I think the biggest problem with this is that, like, sure, that is a horrible scene to put in a children's show, by the way. Like, first of all. But then second of all, she never, ever has to, like, pay for it. Or, like, even apologize for it. Because, like, the narrative never punishes her. At the end, she gets exactly what she wants. Acme takes that file. So it's like, she doesn't get punished in the narrative whatsoever. And it's just like, well, she did this horrible thing. It's framed as a bad thing. It's not framed like it was a mistake. It is framed as like this is an objectively horrible thing, but yet it's never like punished. I don't want to say punished, but like you know what I mean.
I completely agree. I think the fact that's in a kid's show is one, it's very upsetting to see. But two, they also make the conscious decision to make her black, and they make a lot of the Acme staff black as well. And then they make her kill someone. So the fact that a lot of the black representation is in the show is within the police department is already messed up. But then also the fact that her character then wrongfully kills somebody in the exact same way that black people are killed by police in the real world it's another level of violence. And I think it's really irresponsible for them to put it in a kid's show where presumably black kids are going to be watching that.
I feel like that's just a common thing now is like as a way of doing diversity, you just make the minorities into the oppressors, like in a sense. And you're like, well, we did it. We did it, boys. Racism is no more.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that. The missed potential of Roundabout as a villain character, because he is literally part of the police force.
So far up that he is influencing like every police force in the entire world.
And it's shown through, like, I'm gonna say, especially season 3, it's shown that he's pulling the strings for Vile. He is the way that Vile can skirt by without any legal consequences. He leaves the police department, though, because he becomes he tries to become a permanent Vile faculty member. And that fails, and, you know, there's a whole, like, comic, it's played up for comedic reasons, but it never creates a larger conversation about who promoted this guy. Who are the other people in the police department that allowed...
Or, like, trusting this.
Yeah.
Allowing... Yeah. Exactly.
It shows that Roundabout, sure, is, like, he's one villain that's in the police department, but he's part of a bigger system of people who allowed him to rise to power.
That's definitely, like... It goes against the whole, like, well, if you can't beat him, join him. Like, rise in the ranks and change it from the top. Clearly that doesn't work because no matter how far you go up, there is corruptness. Like, it doesn't matter in what level of power you're at, you can't change the whole system until you abolish it. And I think Carmen Sandiego is a great example of this. as much as I hate that, is that Roundabout is like so high up in the police that he can literally get anyone out of jail at any time, no matter what crime they have committed, which is horrible and is unbelievably something that could probably happen in our world and maybe even does. It just goes to show that like literally it's like so close. It's so close to like making a point, and then it just doesn't, because it's like, well, when he was caught, he got arrested, and it's like, well, yes, but he was doing that for like presumably decades, presumably a long time. It doesn't matter like when you catch him. This was allowed to happen, and this was happening, and no one was noticing this.
And I think it also would be safe to assume that in this world, he wasn't the only person doing that. Like, he had to be inspired by someone, right? Like, he didn't wake up one day and become the only corrupt cop that was working with Vile. There's probably a network of corrupt cops working with Vile.
We learned Vile's been around since, like, the medieval times. So, like, clearly, like, they were there before the police force even existed. They could have created it, for all we know.
It's so true. It's so true.
Like, every system that exists in the modern era of where Carmen Sandiego takes place, Vile was there for its creation. So, like, this has been going on for centuries. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you caught him, because they're clearly everywhere.
All right, the last thing that I want to talk about is reimagining the ending of season 4, and we kind of talked about that in our video together about the whole series, but I want to specifically talk about why the writers made Zach and Ivy join Acme and in effect turn them into police officers.
Okay, here's the thing. Zach and Ivy, I mean, maybe someone else feels differently, but like when watching it, I never got the sense that Zach and Ivy like cared about justice or really cared about doing the right thing. They were just helping Carmen, and they were having fun. They realized their racing career wasn't going in the exact direction that they wanted to. They saw another opportunity and was like, hey, we can help people, whatever that means, and like do good. And so we'll do that. Like, it was never like Carmen where like she had the drive to stop evil. Like, they were just kind of there as like fun sidekicks. So like making them Acme, it A, just doesn't make sense for their characters, because this was never something that they wanted. They never expressed interest in that, like, ever. And then B, it's just like, well, what is Acme's point now? Because like Chief said, she started Acme to eliminate Vile. So now what is Acme doing? Just like using their little fart guns to like scare people. I do like that. I love their little fart guns. I know they're not fart guns. Like, it's like chloroform or whatever.
That's an interesting point, though. I didn't really think about the fact that they had those guns, but they don't have any lethal weapons, do they?
Maybe it's because Chief was like, I killed somebody.
No, I think that you make a great point that Zach and Ivy never talked about wanting to become part of the police institution.
They did this for what? Put them in suits?
But doing that also implies that, like, police officers are in that position because they care about justice, so that like Zach and Ivy have worked with Carmen and have been doing vigilante justice for a really long time, and then so the next logical step for them is to join the police and do it through them.
Now what? Because you two join them and everything's okay? You're gonna fix it? You're gonna be the difference? This is what changes the status quo?
Listen, I'm a bad YouTuber, so I forgot to film an outro for that interview. But I hope you enjoyed that. I really loved having that conversation with Theo. It was great to talk about all of the different plot points that we struggled with while we were watching. And yeah, I hope that you learned something. I hope that you liked this kind of combination of the history of kids' propaganda and like this case study into Carmen Sandiego in particular. Interested in creating kids educational content myself, so by doing this kind of work I feel like I'm learning more about what to avoid, what to include, and it's my hope that I can eventually make something that, you know, does not have cops in it and actually imagines a world where cops are not necessary, that we can rely on community members and not need violence to solve all of these issues. I'd love to hear if you were a fan of Carmen Sandiego when you were younger, or if you just watched the Netflix show, and what your thoughts are. I'd also love to hear if there are any other TV shows or games that you've revisited from your childhood and realized just how many cops there are in them, because that is something I'm constantly experiencing. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. And, check out my other social media. I stream on Twitch twice a week. I like to play educational kids games, but also just like queer games for fun. And check out my other channel so you can watch me play video games. Yeah,